Well, I was 16 at the time. It was 1972 when we came here, and Humble was pretty small back then. It's very different today.
You know what, when I'm coming down here though, we come through that area near, I think it's Commerce, Oklahoma. And I always think of your dad when I drive through there, because he tells me, he said he was the, is it executor or something of a graveyard there. And he was kind of the older remaining one that voiced any kind of authority on it and stuff. And he talked about growing up there, and also I drive through there, I always think of him. And I remember him telling about seeing the guy in the Cadillac and different stories.
That was, said, boy, I sure would like to have one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lord just kind of prompted him. He said, what's that symbol on that steering wheel right there in front of you?
Mm-hmm.
He looked down and he saw it. Said, oh, thank you, Lord.
And probably nicer than the one he saw.
Yeah.
Nicer than the one that, what it was, he saw, I think he saw a fully loaded Buick or something like that. And he'd always wanted to have one of those. And the Lord just prompted him to take a look at the steering wheel he had in his hands. And it had the Cadillac emblem in the middle of the steering wheel. And God told him, I gave you a car one notch above the Buick.
He sure did.
Yeah. Gave you
Some
what
of
you wanted
his
and more.
one or two liners I still quote him on. One of my favorite though was, he said, we wouldn't worry so much about what people think about us if we only realize how little people think about us.
That's right.
Sounds like my dad.
Uh-huh.
But I never forgot that
One I always liked, and I use it now that I'm primarily in charge of our prime timers at Lindale, is I always want them to know, if I haven't told you lately, I love you. And he was always saying that. He said, if I haven't told you lately, I love you. And he really did. He wasn't telling a fib.
One of the things I mentioned there in the thing was so many people called him Papa Jack. And that was his nickname from others, but he had a nickname for about everybody.
Oh, everybody.
Peppermint Patty.
Patty
McClendon.
Yeah, and Joel was Joel McClendon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he had one for just about everybody like that. If they were very close to him at all, they had a nickname.
Yeah.
Rockin' Robin. Robin Ritchie.
Robin Ritchie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was good.
Uh-huh.
Vicki, tell us about when you first came to Humble with your dad. I know you were still at home. Tell us about those memories.
Well, I was 16 at the time. It was 1972 when we came here. And Humble was pretty small back then. It's very different today. The mall wasn't here yet, so I think the airport had been here for a few years, but it was still rather new, so the town had not grown. It was pretty small. But I remember coming from the West Coast, how friendly everybody was. And I think they just made us feel so at home. And the kids, the youth at the time, because like I said, I was 16, so the youth group, they took me in, and like I was just one of them, and a lot of times we would go in what we called cruising Main Street in Humble. We would go driving up and down Main. That was about the only street around to hang out, but they really made me feel welcome. And I remember one time, my mother, after church one day, there was a couple of girls, and I do believe it was Pam and Kim, possibly, Needham, and Mom said, well, are you guys want to do something after church, or what are you guys going to do? And they said, we're not guys, we're girls. And so we realized it's y'all, it's not you guys. So, but anyway, the church was just very welcoming to us. It's my understanding, I wasn't here when the vote took place, but it was my understanding that the vote was pretty nearly unanimous to call Dad to come here. And so we felt very blessed and felt like that this was really where God wanted us to be. So even at that young age, I knew that. But the church at the time was on Granbury and Avenue D, and it was just a little bitty, pretty much wood frame, I guess.
A-frame church.
A-frame church, and it was very, very small compared to this beautiful building that we're in today. So it's grown a lot.
But you all had a building program of your own, though, and as I recall, your dad led the building program there on South Houston, and it's a beautiful building. Mm-hmm. Tell us about your memories there.
Well, I remember that the Lord worked it out for us to even have that land. I can't tell you specifics because I really don't know, but to get the land there on South Houston Avenue, just right before you get to Will Clayton. And actually, during the building part of it, I was in Thailand doing a mission. I was a MAPS volunteer. So I was in Thailand at the time, but I know that there was a lot of work that went into that. I know Dad probably had a lot of sleepless nights because he always would think way into the future. He always tried to think of every possibility before he would actually make a decision to do something. So he was always trying to predict, I guess you could say, what the possible problems could be. So I know that he was probably lost a lot of sleep, as I said. But it came out beautifully, and
Really
honestly,
did.
I wasn't there during the dedication. Were you there during the
I was
dedication?
here.
So maybe you could speak a little more about the dedication than I could.
Well, and I was here during the construction as well. I remember going inside the building when it was still just framed out. It wasn't even sheetrocked, and how exciting it was trying to imagine what was going in the particular rooms, and being involved somewhat in selecting some of the sound equipment, because at the time I was working for a recording studio and a sound company. Of course, there was no such thing as digital audio and those sorts
That's
of
for
things
sure.
during that time. So it was much more rudimentary than what you have here at the church now. But yeah, it was pretty exciting. Butch Needham was the building superintendent, and so it was kind of exciting to see his crews making progress. And Dad, as Vicki said, was always thinking about what was coming next, and always worried about whether there'd be good weather so they could finish a particular part of the building. But it was, I guess if you really could imagine what it was like to come from a small wood frame church into, well, some of the people will remember coming to this church from the one on South Houston. Well, it was that dramatic an upgrade to the
Oh, it's a
facilities
nice
that
church.
they had. And so it was really exciting to be involved, if not involved planning or actually doing the work. It was exciting to watch it happening.
Just a point of trivia, when we moved from the South Houston location to here, we didn't take any of the pews or anything, but we wanted to take something from the church there, and we made it part of the understanding of the contract when we sold to the city. We took the baptistry from the other building and moved it here, so the baptistry we have here came from the building that your dad built.
Oh my.
Stephen Nutt, I think, had flooded the baptistry into the auditorium a couple of times, and we forgave him. And staying in keeping with that, we've had some that have flooded it here, so just something like that, I guess, goes with it. But anyway, it's a neat feature. Vicki, you had a funny story I wanted you to tell about your car and when you were a member of the youth. Share that if you would.
The CAs, the Christ Ambassadors at the time, we had an outing to Dewson Park, which is very different today than it was back then. Back then it was out in the woods. It was very small, and like you said, dirt roads and things like that.
Fire rings.
Yeah, it was not as nice as it is today, but we went out there and we were going to have a Volkswagen race. That was one of the activities. And what that was that you would take two Volkswagens, somebody behind the wheel, the motors are off, and that you put it in neutral, and then there was a gang of kids behind each one pushing it, and that was whoever could push it the fastest across the finish line won the Volkswagen race. Well, our family had a Volkswagen station wagon at the time, and what I did, I was the driver, and I didn't know anything about cars. I'm this little teenager, and whenever the kids started pushing the car forward, all of a sudden things got really hot and smoke starts coming up, and we realized that my car had an electric starter, and so in order to get the gear into neutral, you had to put the key in, what is it?
And just in the on
Just
position.
in the on position, and therefore that starter, it burnt the motor completely up. I mean, the motor was gone. It totaled the car. I don't even remember who won the race.
And how did your dad respond?
He was always so gracious. The way you saw him in public was the way you saw him in private. He was a gracious man through and through, and he just rolled with the punches. I don't remember him getting mad. I'm sure he was very upset and disappointed, but he wasn't mad at me or anything like that because I was just a dumb kid.
Well, that's a great story. Lyle, when you came here a little later, your dad was already here. You worked with him in the music and all. What would be some of your favorite and most special memories?
Well, actually, I worked alongside Grady and Bonnie Townsend, who were the worship directors at the church when I first came to Humble. When I first came to Humble in any kind of capacity at the South Houston campus. And we did dramatic productions, God's Trombones. I still remember Rick Worsham, son, your arm's too short to box with God.
Yeah.
And we did a production called Who Will Call Him King of Kings? And about that time is when I started at Lindale. And we did Who Will Call Him King of Kings for Easter in grand fashion for about 6 years.
Wow.
And even decided not to do it any longer under quite a bit of protest. But that all came as a result of being involved in the music and the drama ministry here at Humble. And I think it was Bill and Paula Stringer were heading up that dramatic part. So it was quite a memory,
A lot of great memories there.
Yeah.
I remember when we first came, you were still here, and you gave me one of your cassettes with some recordings of yours, and we were driving back, I remember, and going through Oklahoma, I just kept playing it. I really liked it. Finally, my wife says, you know, I like Lyle too, but don't you think you need to let him rest a little? And but anyway, we've had a good friendship ever since.
Well, about that, I recall this church, because it's only had 3 pastors in the last 60 odd years, was not really accustomed to having a platform committee or a pastoral search committee. So it's been kind of a new experience each time a pastor has been selected. And I recall the process, and we'd had 2 or 3 people come and preach, and they were good and the people liked them. But when you and Sister Poole came, I love the way God does things, and he will let you know unmistakably who is the man for the job. And see, God's even amen in me. But Yeah, God is very clear, very plain, and it was unmistakable that that the Pools were the next in line for the leadership of this church, and I think it's been evidenced as the real deal by the success of this ministry and the continued success here in this town.
So many of the things that God's allowed us to do, I have to look back though. When your dad left, we had money in the bank and the church was out of debt. And we could have never done what we've been able to see happen had it not been for your dad. But also, I look back also to Brother Johnson. When your dad came, he had been here for like 16 or 17 years and had left a good foundation that
Yes.
he built on. And,
Yes.
and of course, all the others before, you know, everybody had a good part. And I think that's part of what's brought us 100 years and made it special.
Well, and I think, just to speak to that, any work that is bathed in prayer, God's going to honor. And this church began, as I understand it, with a prayer meeting and with people who were hungry for the infilling of the baptism of the Holy Spirit
Amen.
and really wanting that direction and that guidance. And here we are.